Hello, today hunters will share their scary, interesting, and even funny stories from their adventures. Subscribe and like if you like my content. Let's not delay, let's go. TLDR, when hunting in the Norwegian wilderness, someone started shooting at us in the middle of the night. A buddy and I went hunting over a long weekend a few years ago. We hiked into our hunting terrain and stayed in a tent. This was in middle of nowhere in the Norwegian wilderness, and we had exclusive hunting rights to the area, so we didn't really expect any other people to be there. No cell service within something like a 5 to 6 kilometer radius and something like 10 kilometers to our cars. We were camped next to a small lake and didn't see any other people there for the first couple of days. On our last night there, we were eating dinner next to our campfire pretty late at night, so everything outside our immediate surroundings was pitch black. Suddenly we heard someone take a shot on the other side of the lake with what sounded like a rifle. We thought it was a bit strange, since there shouldn't have been any other hunters anywhere close by, but we just figured someone was fucking around further away than it sounded like. We forgot about it and settled back in to eat. After another 5 to 10 minutes, someone took a second shot, which sounded like it came from much closer to us. This time, the bullet hit some rocks right next to us, like 5 meters or so. We both sort of froze for a few seconds while looking at each other, and then just ran to our tent to pick up our shotguns. We then ran quite a ways into the woods and just hunkered down. After a few minutes we heard another shot, and were pretty sure it hit our tent, which later turned out to be correct. We obviously had no idea of what to do. We couldn't call the cops since there was no cell service, and it was completely dark, so we couldn't really hike out of there without using flashlights, which seemed like a terrible idea. We ended up finding a downed tree with a little cave-like thing under the roots and just sat there until morning. We then packed up as quickly as possible and basically ran back to our cars, where we called the cops. The cops took it pretty seriously, it seemed like, but nothing ever came out of the investigation. Still have no idea what happened or who could possibly have done it. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to be out there with a gun unless they were poachers, which is almost unheard of in Norway. I've never been so scared in my life, and it definitely took a few years before we went back LOL. I come from a big country family. We live on a farm, we raise our own food and meat animals, and we hunt and process. My dad's first cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting in. For a bit more backstory, on the homestead I grew up on, and still live on, it was my parents, my pops' first cousin and his wife, me and my 4 sisters, and my 4 female second cousins. So 4 adults and 9 kids, and sometimes my pop's brother comes to stay with us too, especially when hunting season is starting up. So hunting season, deer, is going on, and my pops, his brother, Uncle K, and the cousin we live with, Uncle V, are all getting ready to go hunting. Some of us kids decide to tag along. Me, 12, my sister S, 15, and my cousin A, 14. We go out further into the woods than we normally do, set up camp, etc. Important fact, during the time we're setting up, my pops and uncles are being quiet while the 3 of us kids talk. My voice hasn't changed. This is important. Us kids keep chattering away, while the adults are just letting us get our energy out while they check the survival equipment, make sure the guns are clean and working, etc. Strong, silent Southern types, ha 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 ha. There's a rustling in the thick brush around us, and suddenly 3 creepy-looking guys enter the clearing. They stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on his belt. They are clearly drunk as fuck. They keep looking between A and S and my pops and uncles like they're debating something. My pops and uncles stand up. Last bit of backstory. Every dude in my family is fuck off huge. I'm 19 now, and I'm 6 feet 5 inches. My dad is the biggest at 6 feet 10 inches, 280, just deeply intimidating man, and so are Uncles V and K. The guys laugh nervously as my Uncle V picks up one of the freshly cleaned rifles and points it at them. These dudes start running out the clearing like the devil was after them. My pops immediately says we're clearing out. My uncles don't even question it, and neither do us kids. We're freaking out, and we totally take things down sloppy, but my pops doesn't say anything about us messing up his camping equipment. We get back into cell service, and my dad calls the cops about seeing those fuckers, but the cops don't seem to think it's serious since nothing happened. It's at that moment I realized A, S, and me with my unchanged voice were the only ones these guys could hear talking. They thought they'd come across a camp of 3 girls by themselves. I don't want to even think about what would have happened if my dad and uncles hadn't been there. I was camping in northern Ontario, not far from Sudbury. Camp was a few hours' hike from a gravel road that came off of a road near Tilton Lake. It was about 15 of us hiking back after 2 days camping when we find ourselves in a clearing and decide to stop for a water break and to let the group catch up. While waiting, we started to hear someone yelling. They didn't say, "Help me," but they were screaming, "Help." It sounded like a woman screaming for her life. More than half of the group just circled up, and while most people were now crying of fear, a few of us pulled out knives, started a fire, and called Sudbury police over satellite phone with our coordinates. 2 of the group continued down the trail to guide the cops to the clearing while we waited and tried to calm those who were crying. The shrieking stopped after 15 minutes of repeating, and suddenly it was just silent. Very creepy. Eventually, maybe an hour later, about 6 to 8 cops with shotguns came down the trail and told us to wait so they can investigate. All they found was bone fragments and a lot of blood. They escorted us back to the highway, and later in the year, they called back the trip leader to let them know the blood they tested came back as not belonging to a human. We also found on YouTube that deer and similar animals can make a screech for help that sounds like a woman when they have had a punctured lung. We all agreed that it was 99% likely that what we heard was a black bear killing a screeching deer and dragging it off before the cops arrived and it got dark. It haunted me until we found that audio on YouTube, and it was unmistakably the same sound we all heard that day in the forest. I once held a hunting lease in Middle Georgia. It was an abandoned hunting camp that hadn't been used in several years. I'm not superstitious at all, but this place was legitimately spooky. It was miles down an overgrown dirt road and completely surrounded by woods. It's probably the most secluded place I've ever been. I used to hunt there by myself a lot, and there was always this weird sense that I wasn't alone out there. There was a locked gate at the front of the property, but it was not uncommon for us to find the front door of the cabin open, even when the door was locked. That was pretty creepy, but that's not what this story is about. One evening, I was hunting down in a small valley by a food plot we put lining a creek that bordered the property. From the minute I sat down, I had a weird feeling, like I wasn't in a safe place, even though I was holding a .308 with ballistic-tipped rounds. I didn't feel like I was the top predator out there. I didn't see any deer while I was sitting the stand, but the forest was abuzz with activity. Birds, squirrels, and other critters singing their normal evening symphony, and then, all of the sudden, silence. Everything just stopped. It felt like everything in the woods were looking right at me. It was getting dark fast anyways, and I was extremely creeped out, so I packed up my gear and started the walk back up to the cabin. About 100 yards away, I had this feeling that something was coming up behind me. I spun around and pointed my rifle back down the path towards the food plot, and that's when I saw it. There was something standing in the middle of the path. It wasn't a person, but it didn't look like a deer or anything I've seen before. There was hardly any light to make out any features, but it almost looked like some kind of bipedal deer or something. It was just standing there, staring at me. I quickly made my way back to the cabin, packed up my stuff, and got out of there. I just let the lease run out. Never went back after that. This happened when I was growing up, around 2004 or 2005, when I was about 13 years old. It took place in a rural area, a good ways outside the town of Uvalde, Texas. The town itself was really small back then, and not much to look at. It's just one of those towns that really isn't on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease that was about 1,000 acres, I think, down outside of that area, and was complaining about a ton of hogs that were tearing up their land. Being open season on hogs in the South, my dad thought he would surprise me that summer and take me down for a week to go hunting for them. Not only did that help him with networking for his job, but also gave us some quality father/son time. I remember the drive down there from Dallas was torture. It was about 7 hours in my dad's hardtop Jeep Wrangler. That car was so uncomfy. I hated it. All had to do was either stare out the window or try and beat Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket, something I was never able to accomplish in my youth Lowell. The drive, obviously, took most of the day so we got there in the early evening. The owner of the land had told my dad that he hadn't had anyone lease it that year yet, and the cabin in the property might be a little rough and dusty. I didn't really care. At this point in my life, I had been in Scouts for a couple years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods or fishing with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it. So after unlocking the gate and driving to the cabin on the land, we settled in. The cabin was pretty rough, dust and dirt everywhere, flies. I remember that it looked like some raccoons had gotten into the cabin and crapped on the floor. After cleaning up a bit and getting the sleeping bags out, then setting up the cots, we decided to sleep. Something about that night was weird. I never was able to get comfortable enough to fall asleep for any restful amount. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I had that feeling of being watched. I was finally able to drift off for what I guessed was an hour maybe. When we woke up, it was early, about 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs and find a good place to set up a blind. It was the summer and horribly hot in the afternoons, so morning was the best time to be out and about. After walking for an hour or so, We came to area of trees, lightly dense, and luckily found some signs of hogs. Typical torn-up ground where they had been rooting, so we followed them into the trees. I was looking for more signs when my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. Some of their body was blocked by trees. This was private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We also had confirmation from the owner before we got to the lease that nobody was there. Not to mention, the gate was locked up when we first arrived. The person was wearing some bright-colored red jacket. We slowly walked toward them. My dad called out something like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." The person didn't move at all, dead still. We were about 30 yards away and could see that he was turned away from us with his hands in his pockets. Weird thing was that the person was in a ski jacket and what looked to be ski pants. Now this is Texas in the summer. It was about 98 outside by then. My dad called out again. No reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unsnapped the clip to his pistol holster. That's all we had at the time since we were only scouting the area. The rifles were back at the cabin. We approached the person's right side, and then my dad told me to stay put about 20 yards away. I stayed and crouched down, watched him circle around to the front of the man all the while talking to him, asking if he was okay. He finally passed around to the front of the man, and my dad stood straight up with a confused look on his face. I called out and said, "What's wrong?" And he called back saying, "It's a mannequin." I walked over to it while my dad stood there staring, and as I got closer, one thing stood out the most. The clothes it was wearing were brand new. No dust, sap, bird droppings, or signs of being outside for more than day at most. At that moment, I looked at my dad and could see him get worried. Almost immediately after, I felt that feeling again, like we were being watched, and I knew my dad felt it too. I wanted to start crying. I remember feeling suddenly so scared. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. He scanned the area the whole way back while I was trying to hold back panicked tears. We got back as fast as we could. I was terrified, so it felt like an eternity, but in reality was only about 45 minutes max. After returning, we packed up and beat feet. We drove back home that day and didn't talk much on the way back. I remember right after we left, my dad called his buddy, the owner of the land, and he was confused. He said that he would go check it out next week when he was in the area. He also said that he had never had an issue with people because his property was high-fenced. My dad normally isn't a paranoid person, but me being young and the lease possibly having someone there we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just get out of there. After we got back home, we talked, and my dad wasn't able to sleep the night before as well. He had the same feeling, but didn't want to wake me up, because he thought I was sleeping too. Turns out that next week he got a call from his buddy, and he checked the whole property and never found any trace of anyone, no mannequin or anything. That story still makes my hair stand on end. No idea what that was, but the paranoid man in me thinks it was some kind of trap or something. Not the creepiest thing that happened to me in the woods, but definitely top 3. So whoever was out there, I'm glad we never met. Young hunter, second time out, sitting in a tree stand with my uncle. To paint a picture, our stand was near the bottom left of this acre of land, and we had 2 acres visible, one right in front of us and another to our right, which was mostly visible from the tree stand. It was about 2 or 3 hours in, waiting for some deer to show up. We had heard a lot of different animals, turkeys, foxes, all kinds of birds, and of course squirrels. Very exciting for me. Eventually, at the opposite end of the acre, a small deer come out of the tree line. I had my gun ready just in case, but my uncle signaled me to let it go. He later explained that it would be an extremely hard shot even for him, and also the deer was fairly small, maybe a year old. So I just watched this cute deer munch away at the ground and wag its little white tail for a few minutes. My uncle and I shared a smile. I was so surprised that our tree stand really worked. Bam! Out of nowhere, a bear lunges from the brush and absolutely annihilates this young deer, dead instantly, and pulls it back into the brush. All that motion and power took less than 3 seconds. I was in absolute awe. Even replaying it now in my head, I still just think to myself, what the fuck? I was shocked, terrified, and amazed/excited all at the same time. My uncle, though, had the classic look of fear, probably because I was so young and was there with him, but it was jarring regardless. Not only are bears extremely rare in my area, this is one of 3 times I've ever seen a bear, but the fact that this huge bear was patrolling around or hiding unseen and unheard to either of us was just mind-boggling. I think about 30 minutes later, my uncle decided it's time for us to leave. We get down and pack up our gear in the bed of the truck. He starts it up, and I'm walking around the back taking my sweet time, stretched and let that sun hit my face and cool air in my lungs. I don't remember exactly why, but my eyes were just fixated in one area, as if my brain knew it was seeing something, but it wasn't fully processing what. Suddenly, the mood in the air changed, and the cool air felt dull. I sensed something was wrong and started to turn around and walk to the passenger car door, but I didn't take my eyes off this part of the tree line. Just before I got in, that same bear poked its head out from behind the brush. It was far away, but I could tell its mouth was covered in blood. It just stared. I closed the door and continued to look at it from the back window of the truck. My uncle noticed and looked as well. This time we were both just flat out scared. Never seen or heard anything like that since, but it was a good lesson in understanding that you need to be alert and on your toes when in that kind of situation 100% of the time. That bear was like a ghost, but hundreds of pounds. My dad used to fish with this traditional method of using many rods made of bamboo, placed 5 yards next to one another. The baits are usually alive tiny frogs, as it's for catching a specific catfish-like predator. Anyway, it's always done at night, and considering the method, he had to walk back and forth on the riverbank to check on the fishing rods. It was when I went along on one of these fishing trips where I got a memory worth remembering for as long as I live. So I was sitting on the riverbank next to our motorcycle, munching on snacks I brought from home. My dad was like 70 or so yards away, doing another round of checking the fishing rods. Suddenly, I heard my dad running towards me, and I swear I had never seen such terror in someone's face, especially my dad. He told me in a hurry to hop on the motorcycle, telling me that we were going home. I was like, how about the fishing rods? But then he had started the motorcycle and sped away. Honestly, I didn't think much of it. I was a kid who really didn't enjoy anything in which I had to wait, and the night fishing trip was just not something I enjoyed. So, as much as I want to care, I was just happy to be home early. My dad did collect the rods in the morning, though. It wasn't until 6 to 7 years later in high school, when my dad asked me to join him in another fishing trip, did I internalize and asked my dad what actually happened in that particular night. According to him, basically from where he was standing at the night, up ahead the river has a curve to the right. He heard little splashing of water, meaning that he caught a fish, but when he had come closer, he saw a long-haired woman in a white robe squatting next to the fishing rod, her back on him. Thinking that somebody is stealing his catch, he asked her what she thought she's doing. She then slowly stood up, rotating her body to the left to face him, only there's nothing for what's supposed to be a face. It's not like her face is flat without distinguished figure of eyes and such like any generic ghost, but it's blank, black as the night, like nothing to be seen. My dad froze up, and that's when she said, "Muliho," which means, "Go home." That was when he fled. The only time I see the terror on his face is when he was looking for my mom and I in our bedrooms during a massive earthquake in 2006. My mom and I were outside already. We saw him and thought, why doesn't he go out? A few years after the story took place. My dad was a teacher, and he always had jokes up his sleeves, even voted as the funniest teacher in his school years ago. But I know for sure when he's bullshitting me and when he's being serious. He's seen and heard some weird things in his life, some of which are told to me. He said that he reacted the way he did was a part because he wanted to get the hell out, obviously, and a part because he's afraid that it was a bad omen that something will happen to our family. But thankfully, all he lost were nothing more than just some fish.